Hey guys.
Happy Sunday. So this was a bit of an unusual week. Let's see. We did not have any trees fall down this week.
Nope.
And we did not have any random workers show up.
Nope.
Yeah, not our typical week around here at all. So what did we do with our week when we weren't constantly putting out fires? Well, for one thing, we did a bit of thrifting. Now we try to get over to our circuit of thrift stores at least once a week.
Yeah.
Because 2 years in, we still have quite a list of stuff that we're looking for the house. We don't want to pay retail for stuff, but we also don't want to sacrifice on quality. So patience is definitely king. And we had a pretty good week. So I thought we would show you what we found this week when we were out thrifting, because everything we brought home was something that has been on the list for a bit. Okay, item number one, and this is exciting for us. Finally found a waffle maker.
Yep.
So Mr. Huff has been holding out for a Belgian waffle maker, which has proved to be a little difficult to find here. I think we'll get one eventually.
Yep.
But in the meantime, we found this cool, I think it's more of a Dutch style that makes the heart shape. So we're at least back in business on being able to make waffles again. So that was that €6?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Okay, and then something else I have been slowly working towards is having some more coastal pieces like serving dishes and things to incorporate into our dining room. So I found this shell serving bowl at one of our thrift stores this week, and it was €3, and it's Emile Henry, so it's a good brand, nice bakewares. So happy to have that. I thought that was a very reasonable price. But I think the thing that we're probably both the most excited about is that we actually now have a nice vacuum.
Yep.
So we have been kind of making do with what we've had. We inherited a little canister vac with the house, and he had picked up another canister vac. But we've really not had anything that was easy to like vacuum rooms without being kind of all crawling around the floor, hunched over and stuff. But vacuums can be like €250, €300. So we weren't in a hurry to go out and spend a bunch of money. And I spotted this one at the Depot Vent this week, and it looks almost brand new. So we paid €11, and I think it's going to do everything we need our vacuum to do. He's excited because it has a really long telescoping handle.
Yeah. Trust me, it does.
Yeah.
There you go. There we go.
So anyway, maybe not the most exciting stuff to everybody, but to us, super exciting because, again, these are all things that were on our list that we've been patiently waiting for. So very pleased with that, and now I'm excited to see what we'll find next week. Now, this was another rainy week, so we really didn't do a whole lot out in the yard, but that meant we had a lot of time for projects in the kitchen. So I thought I would take you along on several different kitchen projects this week, and then we'll finish out the week with my first holiday recipe of the year. So we're going to do an orange cranberry bread that is fantastic. He's going to be getting to eat all the test batches. So he's been
doing my duty.
So I think we're ready to get into it. You want to show what we've been up to?
Let's do it.
All right. So I need to restock a few of my homemade foods in the kitchen today, and I thought I would take you along for that because I think there's kind of a misconception a lot of times with cooking from scratch that what that means is that you're in the kitchen all the time and you're making every food every time you need it. And that's really not the case, or it really doesn't need to be the case. So for us, it's more about periodically making something in a quantity that allows us to have it for a while before we're going to need to make it again. And so really our kitchen is like a whole bunch of systems that work together. So over time, we're kind of building out all of these different homemade foods so that we get to a point where we really have all of them on hand all the time and easy for us to grab. So really as convenient, and maybe even more convenient than buying things ready-made at the grocery store. Okay, so today what I'm going to be working on, I noticed the other day that my Italian seasoning was getting low. So in the kitchen, I have my working spices, which I keep in like a half-pint container. So that gives me more than enough to work with day to day when I'm cooking. And that's poultry seasoning, so let's grab the right one. So this gives me enough to work with day to day when I'm cooking without having to have big bulk amounts of spices in the kitchen. So as I've shown you in the past, I have in my stockpile large jars like this of my bulk spices. And this is what I will use anytime I'm needing to restock the containers in the kitchen. So that way I always have around a half pint of ingredients in the kitchen, and the rest is just somewhere else out of the way. So we're gonna make a quick batch of Italian seasoning today. Now, all of these spice recipes in my rack back here are my own blends, and they're all on the website. So if you're trying to find easy ways to do more for yourself in the kitchen, that's a great place to start because spices are a very easy project. Okay, so all of my spice recipes are sized to fit a half pint jar like this. So when I go to make it, it makes exactly the amount that I'm wanting for my containers. All right, so I went ahead and pulled all the spices, or herbs, I guess, in this case, that we're going to need for this recipe. And I'm not going to bother you with all of the quantities right now because I will include a link that has all of that so you don't have to worry about writing that down when you're following along. Okay, so all the normal suspects in Italian seasoning. So this is our basil. Close those in a minute. Okay, and we've got our oregano. And I buy all of my spices in bulk quantities so that they don't cost a ton of money, because those little tiny spice jars at the store really don't hold very much, and they are pretty costly. So this saves us a ton of money. Okay, so now we're on to our rosemary. I think that's probably my favorite. I love the smell of rosemary. We used to have a huge rosemary plant in our yard, so we need to get one planted here again. It's been kind of strange buying our own after all those years of having our own in the backyard. Okay, so now we're on to thyme. And obviously, I mean, I stock my stuff in pretty big quantity because we go through it quickly. You can certainly stock spices in whatever size makes the most sense for your family and your situation. Okay, now we're on to the last two. So we've got sage. And then finally, marjoram. Now, also, I will say the great thing about making your own spice blends is that you can really customize them to your own preferences. So if there's something in this mix that you don't like, you could simply leave it out, or you could use more of something else that was in the blend. Okay, so that's all of our ingredients, and we're just going to stir that together. And the sage is wanting to clump, so we're going to break that up. But that's really all it takes to make your own Italian seasoning blend. All right, so I've got my wide mouth funnel. There's never a week that goes by that we're not putting this to use. That funnel gets a lot of exercise. And we're just gonna pour that into our jar and apparently onto the counter. And like I showed you or mentioned earlier, all of these are sized to fit a half pint jar. So every time I go to remake it, it's very simple. I don't have to put any extra thought into it. So just like that, we're back in business with our Italian seasoning. Okay, so let me put away these things and then we'll move on to our next kitchen project. Okay, so I'm set up for my next project, but before we dive into that, I wanted to show you a couple things. So if you remember last week when we had that limb come off of our bay tree and we picked a ton of leaves and dried them in the dehydrator. So here is the result of that. So now I've got a nice big, I guess this is probably about a gallon container of bay leaves ready to go. So we are set for the winter and next winter and probably the winter after that. But yeah, we're set on bay leaves for a while. Now, my big exciting find this week was jars of pre-peeled garlic in like a preserving liquid. So when we lived in the US, I always had a really big jar in the fridge of minced garlic that was preserved like this. And it was amazing. Like of all the kitchen tasks, I don't know, I do not enjoy peeling garlic. I know that probably is silly, but it's just a tedious task when you're trying to hurry up and get dinner ready or whatever. So that was always my hack, was to have the minced garlic in the fridge and I could quickly measure out what I needed. I have been looking for 2 years since we got here for something like that and have had no luck. We were checking out the other day at Lidl and I happened to see this on an end cap as just a short promotional item. So I bought 3 jars. I probably should have gotten more, but this was only $1.99. And I have to say, when you look at how much garlic is in there, it's honestly way more economical to buy it like this than it is the fresh garlic and having to peel it yourself. So very excited about that because that's going to make dinner prep a lot easier. Okay, so now our next project today, I am almost out of fruit jam, or I think we probably are just about completely out of fruit jam. So we make all of our own jams and jellies, and we go through them pretty quickly because we like to stir about a spoonful into our plain yogurt in the morning for breakfast to flavor them. And so I think at this point we're down to just fruit butters. Like we have a lot of apple butter, that kind of thing, but we don't have any true jams. So I thought we'd go ahead and make some jam today. Now, earlier in the season when blackberries were available in our yard, I froze a ton of them. So even though I didn't have time at that moment to make a bunch of jam, I knew that if I got the fruit in the freezer, I could later use it to make jam or cobbler or anything else that I wanted to make with it. So I thawed out a bunch of blackberries earlier this week, and now we're going to use them to make a quick batch of freezer jam. So I do can, however, I have a strong preference to freezing foods instead for a number of reasons. I think partly because there's just an ease of it. It's just a really simple project without having to get all the canning equipment out and heat up your kitchen and all of that. But also because it preserves the nutrients better than any other way of preserving. So I've got my blackberries today, and I'm going to be using a pouch of freezer pectin to make a few quick jars of jam. So this could not be an easier project. So we've got our fruit here, which I've pre-measured. We're simply going to crush this fruit to whatever consistency we want for our jam. So I've got my potato masher, and we're just going to get a little bit of an arm workout here and crush up all of our berries. Now, you're supposed to, when you're using freezer jam pectin, use 4 cups of crushed fruit. So I think that ended up settling on, I think there's 2 quarts of fresh berries, should break down to about our 4 cups that we need for the recipe. We had an amazing blackberry season this year. It was really, I think, here in Normandy, just a good fruit season. We had lots of apples, lots of blackberries. I wish we had pears because I think anybody who had pear trees also had a ton of pears this year. We'll have to get one planted sometime, or plant a few of them. All right, we're getting there. And this is a great project to do with kids because when you take all of the canning stuff out of it, all the hot water and all of the equipment, this becomes something that kids can do because there's no cooking involved. So this is a really good early introduction to just getting kids in the kitchen and working. This is definitely something that my kids did with us when they were growing up. Okay, so I think texture-wise that looks pretty good. Let's see where we're at on the measurement. Yep, we're right on the money. So About 2 quarts of blackberries will give you your 4 cups crushed. All right, and I've got a few little stragglers sticking in there. We'll see if we can get those out. Okay, so next step when making blackberry jam, this is my sugar. That's 1.5 cups of sugar because that's what the packet calls for. And then we're gonna add to that 1 of these packets. So we don't have to worry about measuring anything here. And that's just the pectin that we're gonna need to have the jam firm up properly. Okay, so we're just gonna stir the pectin and the sugar together, and then we'll break up any of these little clumps that we've got in the sugar. A few more clumps. That's a Normandy thing. Definitely humid here. Okay, so we've got those 2 ingredients stirred together. And now the only thing we need to do is add that to the crushed fruit. Okay, and then we're just gonna stir that in to incorporate everything. And then the recipe on the packet calls for stirring these ingredients together for 3 minutes. So we'll get busy stirring. Let's see what our, okay, so that's pretty much our 3 minutes there. So you can see that at this point, it's already starting to turn into jam. So it's not as thick as it's gonna be later. It will continue to thicken after we jar it, but it's definitely no longer just fruit, sugar, and pectin. It's actually starting to look like jam. So let's get this jarred up and we'll have another project off of our list. Okay, so if you're making freezer jam, it's very important that you put it in a container that can go in the freezer safely. So these are freezer jars. They have a much thicker wall than a traditional canning jar or a mason jar. And I almost exclusively use these because I just like the flexibility. I can use these for canning if I need to, but they're also something that can safely go in the freezer. Okay, so we're gonna fill these up to the headspace line. So if you haven't used a freezer jar before, one of the nice things is they have a line across the top. This is the fill line. So you don't want to fill past that line because you need to leave a little headspace since foods are gonna expand when they're frozen. So that just ensures that you're not gonna have your jar break or the lid come off or whatever. And I think I have to say, out of all the jams, if I could only have one, it would be blackberry. My husband would probably agree with me unless I asked him if he could only have blackberry cobbler or blackberry jam, because he is very pro cobbler. Okay, so we're just going to fill those up to the headspace line. Now, the recipe on the back of the package of pectin will usually tell you that it makes about 5 half pints. So that would be like 2.5 pints. But you're going to find with freezer jam that it will vary a little bit. I think I overfilled that one a tiny bit. Let's get a spoon. But don't worry about it if you end up with slightly more or less. Okay. Yeah, so this is a good example of that. So they would say it would make about 2.5, and I'm getting more like 3 with a tiny bit left over for a snack. So it's going to vary a little bit based on which fruit you're using. Just get lids on those, and then they will be ready for the freezer. So you can't beat that. We have fruit that we picked off of our own blackberry canes, so no cost there. jars that we're able to reuse over and over. So for just the price, a bit of sugar and pectin, we now have 3 more jars of blackberry jam to stick in the freezer. Okay, so I have one final kitchen project to finish up today, and this is actually something that Mr. Huff and I started yesterday. Now, we're coming into the holidays, and I feel like this is the time of year where you suddenly need a ton of eggs for recipes, and then you're working with recipes that are calling for like a certain number of egg whites or a certain number of egg yolks, and then you're left wondering what to do with the rest of it. So this is my solution for that, and let me show you what I do. So if you have extra eggs because you caught a sale, you haven't used them up fast enough, maybe you have backyard chickens that are overwhelming you with eggs at the moment, a really easy thing to do is to freeze your excess eggs in a muffin pan like this. So it happens to be very convenient that one large egg, is about the same size as one of the cups on a muffin pan. So what we did here is we simply beat an egg so that we combined the yolks and the whites, and then poured each egg into its own cup on the muffin pan. So now I know when I put these in the freezer that one of these discs is going to be equal to 1 egg. So if I'm in a bind and I need some eggs for a recipe, I can thaw some of these out and use them, and I'm not going to have any question about the measurements. So super simple. And then what I've done here with this ice cube tray, so like we were saying, if you have recipes that call for egg whites or egg yolks but don't use both, you can simply freeze the other, and then you will have them to use at another time. So in this case, I have some of this tray full of egg yolks. Now 2 egg yolks will fit 1 spot in an ice cube tray, and 1 egg white will fill a spot in an ice cube tray. So when you have a large egg, it's essentially going to be about 1/3 egg yolk, 2/3 egg white. So that's how that maths out. So what I have done here to make life easy in the future is I have made bags for the freezer. So you can see here 1 cube equals 1 egg white. Over here, 1 cup equals 1 egg, and then 1 cube equals 2 yolks. So now they're in a measurement that makes it really easy in the future for me to put these to use. So I'm avoiding waste now, and I'm making my life easier somewhere down the road when I'm needing eggs that I maybe don't have at the moment. So we're just going to pop these out and get them into their respective bags. And I have an article that I have published this week with all of the information that you would need to do this. So it has all of the different measurements that you might need just to make this really easy. So I will link to that in today's video description. Okay, and I'll seal that in a minute after I've washed my hands. Okay, so then we're going to do the other 2 trays. We'll do the whites. These cubes over here are whites. And you can see all of these molds that I'm using are silicone, which just makes it really easy to unmold stuff without a lot of hassle. So definitely recommend building out your collection of silicone molds for stuff like this. And this is all stuff that I've just picked up secondhand at thrift stores and things over the years. So it really doesn't have to be a big investment item, but it is something that will help you avoid a lot of food waste. So now we've got egg whites, and we'll finish with our yolks. All right, so there we go. We've got all of these eggs preserved in a way that we can pull them out easily in the future and put them to use. So much better than tossing out your extra egg whites or egg yolks the recipe. Okay, so now that we have the kitchen restocked, let's work on a recipe together. Now today we're going to be making my brand new orange cranberry bread. So this is a recipe that you can either bake in the oven or in a bread machine. I've tested it to work either way, so just whichever is easiest for you. And I will say there are some recipes that when I'm developing them, I get it right on the first try, and there are others that take many, many attempts. Now this one took me 4 tries to get it just right. And let me show you the secret ingredient that finally brought it all together. So in this container here, I have some dried cranberries that I've soaked overnight in orange juice. So what this will do is it will soften and plump up the cranberries, but it's also infusing them with orange so that in every bite of bread, you get a very strong taste of both the cranberry and the orange. This was the game-changing ingredient that really just brought everything together. Okay, so today I'm going to show you how to make it in the oven, and I will include a link to the recipe so that you can also access the bread machine version if you want to do that way instead. All right, so we're going to start by adding all of our dry ingredients to the bowl. So we've got some all-purpose flour. And as usual, I'm not going to get into the quantities, so don't feel like you have to write stuff down. I will include a link that has all of that information. Okay, so there's our all-purpose flour, some granulated sugar. We'll just go ahead and break up those little clumps that are there. Okay, and then to that, we're going to be adding an ingredient that I showed you guys last week, which is my dried orange peel powder. Now you can use fresh orange zest. I've included instructions for that as well, but I'm going to be using my powder today. And you can see just a very fine powder, and it smells amazing. Anytime you open this jar, you're hit with this very strong orange scent. We're going to do some of that in the recipe. That'll be another way we're infusing the orange flavor. Okay, and then one of those things that comes back with me from the US always is my Rumford baking powder. Get some of that in here as well. Okay, so we're just going to stir those ingredients until they're all incorporated. Yeah, it smells very orangey. Okay, so that looks pretty evenly mixed. And so now we can add all of our wet ingredients. So we're going to include our cranberries as a wet ingredient. Now let me show you how we're going to prepare those. Now you want to soak these overnight. Longer is fine. So if you want to do this a day or two ahead, if you're trying to get ready for guests coming over the holidays or whatever, you can certainly do that. And the amount of orange juice that they are going to absorb is in part going to depend on how dry they were, but also just how long you were soaking them. So we've got a little bit leftover orange juice in here. What I'm going to do is scoop all of my cranberries into here. And then we'll reserve that extra liquid, the extra orange juice, for here in a minute, and I'll show you what we're going to do with that. And don't worry if you're making this and you have no juice left. Like I said, it's really going to depend on how dry your cranberries are, how long these were sitting in the fridge. Sometimes I have almost no liquid, and that's fine. Almost got them all. And you can see they're probably, I would say they're about double the size that they were before we soaked them. So we definitely have puffed them up a little bit. Okay, so these are going to go into our recipe. And then to that, we're going to add 3 beaten eggs. Make sure we get all of that. I've got a little bit of oil. This is like a canola oil, just something neutral. And you could do an equal amount of butter if you wanted to. Okay, and then we have just a small amount of milk. And the final thing we're going to be adding is a small amount of orange juice. Now, you'll remember I said we were going to reserve the extra orange juice from our cranberries. So this is just a jigger. It's like what you would normally use to do cocktails and that sort of thing. I use it a lot in baking. So we're going to add 2 tablespoons of orange juice to this recipe. So we don't want to waste anything. We're going to start by taking it out of our cranberries, and this time we had enough left over that we didn't have to actually pull any out of our orange juice container. So we'll just add that back. And then all we have to do now is stir everything together until it's evenly mixed. Now the great thing about this recipe is it's easy enough to pull together when you have guests visiting. But if you want to get ahead of things, this is actually a bread that's going to freeze really well. So you could certainly, in the weeks leading up to, say, Thanksgiving or Christmas, bake a loaf or 2 and stick it in the freezer and then just pull it out closer to when you need it. So just a little trick to get ahead on all of your holiday prep. All right, just making sure now that I'm not seeing any flour that hasn't been stirred in. Okay, so we don't want to over stir. I don't see any more flour, so that looks good there. You see that's just a quick, simple batter. And now let me get a spatula and we'll get that into our pan. And this pan is a bit of a nostalgia thing for us because if you guys remember back in the day when I think it was JCPenney that used to do the 10 off 10 coupons at the holidays, we ended up with one of these each. We've had these for a lot of years, had them in the US. Now they're here in our kitchen in France. All right, so we're just going to get that poured into there. Now this is a quick bread, almost like a pound cake, really. So it's going to develop a dark brown crust and then have a nice yellowy orange interior. So one thing to note when you're baking this is that you can't just go by the color of the crust to determine when it's done, because it is going to be a denser bread. It's going to need a bit more time for the center to cook through. So this is definitely one that you're going to want to do the toothpick test on, and then you'll pull it out when it comes out almost clean. And if for some reason you feel that the crust is cooking faster than the interior, you can certainly cover it with a piece of foil just to slow down the browning when you're getting towards the end. All right, I don't want to waste any of this, so we're getting every last bit out of the bowl that we can. Okay. And then we're going to pop this into a 350 degree oven, and it's going to take between 45 and 60 minutes to cook this, or to bake this. So it really just depends on your oven, since everyone's is a little bit different. So the first time you're making it, just kind of keep a close eye on things when you're getting around the 45-minute mark, and just kind of maybe check it every 5 minutes until it seems to be done. All right, so we're going to get that in the oven, and then we'll come back in a bit and I will show you how that turned out. Okay, so the bread's out of the oven. It's had time to cool, and I've sliced it. Take a look. This just makes the most moist, flavorful bread. You get that orange cranberry flavor in every bite, and it's such an easy recipe. So you could serve this Thanksgiving or Christmas as a breakfast recipe. You could even use it as a dessert. And as I mentioned earlier, you could even stick a loaf in the freezer so you got something quick to pull out if you're in a hurry. So as usual, I will include a link to this recipe in the description below the video.